Richard Davenport believed the world was a machine of his own making, and men like his son-in-law, Leo Vance, were merely ill-fitting cogs, easily discarded. On the day of the final divorce hearing, Richard sat beside his daughter, Clara, a portrait of polished steel and inherited arrogance. He watched Leo, who sat alone at the opposing table, his shoulders not slumped in defeat, but set in a posture of quiet acceptance. Richard saw this stillness as weakness, the resignation of a man who knew he was outmatched. He didn't know that acceptance and resignation are two very different things. Within 2 years, Richard Davenport would stand on a crowded street corner, his world crumbling around him, and be forced to look up at the face of the man he had so casually destroyed, displayed 100 feet tall against the New York sky. The cog, it turned out, was the engine. The courtroom was cold, a sterile box of mahogany and muted light that seemed to drain the color from everything. Leo felt the chill not in his skin, but in the hollow space where his life used to be. He had loved Clara, or at least, he had loved the woman he thought she was, the one who had once traced the lines of his blueprints with a finger and whispered about the future they would build together. That woman was gone, replaced by this porcelain figure who refused to meet his gaze, her eyes fixed on her father, as if he were her true north. Richard, a man built from expensive suits and casual cruelty, had orchestrated this entire affair with the precision of a corporate takeover. And in a way it was. He was acquiring his daughter back, free and clear of the depreciating asset she had married. The final judgment was a formality. Leo had agreed to everything. The house, which he had designed himself, its windows perfectly angled to catch the morning sun. The savings, which were mostly his own from before the marriage. Even the car. He asked for only one thing, his drafting tools and his personal journals. Richard's lawyer, a man with a face like a clenched fist, had smirked. Mr. Vance may keep his hobbies, the word hung in the air, dripping with condescension. To them, his architecture was a hobby, a gentleman's pastime that had failed to produce the level of wealth they considered respectable. They were blind to the contracts he had turned down, the compromises he had refused to make on his artistic integrity, choices he had made to spend more time building a home with a woman who was now dismantling it. They saw a man with a modest income. They failed to see the architect whose peers spoke his name with a reverence reserved for the masters. They saw a failure. Their blindness was the only asset they were leaving him, and it would prove to be more valuable than anything they were taking. As he walked out of the courtroom, the weight of his old life lifted, replaced by a strange, unnerving lightness. He had nothing, which meant he had nothing left to lose. Richard and Clara thought they were closing a chapter. They didn't realize they were standing on the preface of a story he was about to write across the skyline. Have you ever felt completely underestimated, written off by the very people who should have believed in you? It's a feeling that can either crush you or forge you into something stronger than they could ever imagine. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, as we dive into a story about a man who rebuilt his entire world from the ashes of a life they burned down. And if you enjoy stories where patience, integrity, and hidden strength win the day, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss what happens next. The lawyer's office, 2 weeks prior to the final hearing, had been the true abattoir. It was a space designed to intimidate, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a view that Richard Davenport probably considered part of his personal portfolio. He sat at the head of a monstrous mahogany table, flanked by Clara and his legal team. Leo sat opposite, alone. He had declined to bring his own lawyer, a decision Richard had openly mocked. Saving your pennies, Leo? Wise. You'll need them. Leo had simply looked at him, his expression unreadable. Inside, he felt a storm of emotion, but his years of training as an architect, a discipline of precision, patience, and immense structural foresight, had taught him how to build a facade as unshakable as any foundation. He knew this was not a negotiation. It was a surrender, and his only goal was to control the terms of that surrender in the one way that mattered to him. Let's get to it, Richard had said, waving a dismissive hand. The assets, his lawyer, a man named Marcus Thorne, slid a portfolio across the table. It was thick, bound in leather, and felt as heavy as a tombstone. For the next hour, they dissected his life. The house in Westchester, a masterpiece of modern design that Leo had poured his soul into, was listed as Clara's primary residence, a gift from me to my daughter, Richard stated, a lie so blatant it was almost impressive. Leo had paid the down payment with money from his first major commercial contract, a fact they had conveniently buried in a mountain of paperwork. The joint accounts, Thorne continued, his voice a monotonous drone. They would be liquidated and transferred to Clara. To cover her emotional distress and the career opportunities she forewent to support your endeavors, Leo almost laughed. Clara's career had been managing her trust fund and chairing charity galas. Her greatest professional endeavor was selecting caterers. But he remained silent, letting the lies pile up like bricks in a wall between them. He watched Clara, searching for a flicker of the woman he married. He found none. She was her father's daughter, her features set in a mask of entitled grievance. Her gaze was distant, as if she were mentally redecorating the house, purging the last remnants of his taste of him. He felt a profound sense of pity for her. She was trading a partner for a warden, a future for a gilded cage. He saw the architecture of her life, and it was a blueprint drawn by her father, a structure with no room for her own design. She would live in it, beautifully decorated and utterly empty, and likely never even notice. The cars, the art, the investments, they went through it all. With each item, a memory was severed. The painting they'd bought in a small gallery in Paris on their honeymoon. The vintage convertible he had restored with his own hands. Each one was just a line item on a ledger, its sentimental value zeroed out. Finally, they were done. Thorne looked at him, a smug glint in his eye. That seems to cover everything. You'll be left with your personal effects and the contents of your private account, which, as we see, is negligible. The word hung there. Negligible. It was meant to be the final nail in the coffin of his dignity. Leo leaned forward, his hands resting flat on the cool, polished wood. The room grew quiet. For the first time, he spoke, his voice calm and steady, carrying an unexpected weight. There are a few items. Richard sighed dramatically. Leo, don't drag this out. You're not getting the cufflinks I gave you for your birthday. Consider them a severance package. Leo ignored him, his eyes on Thorne. I want my drafting table, the one from my grandfather. I want my collection of architectural books. And I want all of my personal journals, sketches, and blueprints. Thorne glanced at Richard, who gave a slight, irritated nod. Fine, your trinkets. Is that all? That is all, Leo said. He then reached into the simple canvas satchel at his feet, the one that looked so out of place next to the gleaming Italian leather briefcases of Richard's team. He pulled out a small, worn object and placed it on the table. It was a leather-bound journal, no bigger than his hand, its cover softened with age and use. The pages were filled with his elegant, precise script and intricate, impossible-looking sketches. It was the heart of his work, the place where his ideas were born. He had dozens more like it at home. This one, however, contained the seeds of a project so ambitious, so revolutionary, that he had never even spoken of it to Clara. It was a dream he had deemed too fragile to share with a world and a wife that measured value only in dollars. He pushed it gently across the table toward Clara. This is for you, he said, his voice soft. It's the original concept sketch for the house. I thought you should have it, to remember what we started to build. It was a test, a final, desperate attempt to see if there was anything left of the woman he had loved. For a moment, her composure fractured. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. Her eyes scanned the familiar lines on the page, the notes in the margin about a breakfast nook where they could watch the sun rise, a garden where they would grow old. A tear escaped and traced a silent path down her cheek. Richard saw it, and his face hardened. Enough of this sentimentality, he snapped, his voice like a whip. He reached over, took the journal from Clara's grasp, and tossed it back across the table at Leo. It slid to a stop just short his hand. We're not interested in your doodles, Leo. The past is the past. Take your little book and go. Clara flinched, then straightened, her mask of cold indifference sliding perfectly back into place. She wiped the tear away with a single, angry motion. The moment was over. The test was failed. Leo looked at the journal lying on the table, then back at their faces. He felt no anger, only a vast, chilling clarity. They hadn't just taken his house, his money, his past. They had tried to take his future, to dismiss it as a collection of worthless doodles. He calmly picked up the journal, its familiar weight a comfort in his hand. He stood up, gave a slight, formal nod, and walked out of the room without another word, leaving them to their victory. He could feel their eyes on his back, their smug certainty a tangible force. They thought they were watching a man walk away with nothing. In reality, they were watching a man walk away with everything that mattered. The months that followed were a study in contrasts. For Clara and her father, it was a period of triumphant consolidation. For Leo, it was a time of quiet, methodical construction. He moved into a small, sparsely furnished apartment in a less fashionable part of the city, a space that felt more like a monk's cell than a home. But it had one crucial feature: a large north-facing window that flooded the main room with a steady, indirect light that was perfect for drafting. He set up his grandfather's table, arranged his books, and began to work. The world thought he was gone, a ghost haunting the ruins of a failed marriage. In truth, he had never been more present. His days were disciplined. He rose before dawn, ran for an hour along the river, and then worked for 12, sometimes 14 hours straight. He ate simple meals at his drafting table, his focus absolute. The pain of the divorce, the sting of humiliation, he channeled it all, not into anger, but into his work. Anger was a fire that consumed. Focus was a lens that concentrated energy into a single, powerful beam. His phone rarely rang. He spoke to few people. He was building, not a new life, but the life he was always meant to have, the one that had been deferred by a love that demanded he be smaller than he was. Meanwhile, Clara flourished in the sun of her father's approval. She threw a lavish freedom party at the house Leo had designed, a detail the society pages noted with a touch of gleeful irony. She was photographed constantly, always smiling, always radiant, always at her father's side. About 6 months after the divorce, she introduced the world to Julian Croft. He was everything Leo was not. He was a hedge fund manager with a dazzling smile, a portfolio of aggressive investments, and a family name that opened doors Richard's money could not. He was, in Richard's estimation, the perfect merger. Leo learned of their engagement not from a friend, but from a glossy magazine left behind at a coffee shop. There was a picture of them, Clara and Julian, on a yacht in the Mediterranean. She was laughing, her head thrown back, a massive diamond on her finger glittering in the sun. He felt a brief, phantom ache, a muscle memory of a love that no longer existed. He looked at Julian's perfect, predatory smile and felt not jealousy, but a strange sense of professional curiosity. The man's facade was too perfect. Leo, who understood structure better than anyone, could see the hairline cracks. The ultimate humiliation was delivered by courier. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope, his name written in elegant calligraphy. An invitation to a family dinner at the Davenport estate. It was not an olive branch, it was a summons, a command performance to witness their triumph. His first instinct was to throw it away. But then a different thought took hold. To refuse would be seen as fear, as an admission that he was too broken to face them. To go, however, would require a level of fortitude he wasn't sure he possessed. He looked around his small apartment, at the blueprints covering every surface, the intricate models for a project so vast it was almost unthinkable. This was his reality. The dinner was theirs. He decided he would go. He would walk into the lion's den, not as prey, but as an observer. The Davenport estate was a monument to new money, a sprawling mansion that tried to imitate old-world grace, but only achieved a kind of ostentatious grandeur. Leo walked up the marble steps, his simple, well-tailored dark suit a stark contrast to the opulence around him. The butler, a man who had known Leo for years, looked at him with a mixture of pity and surprise before leading him to the grand dining room. They were all there. Richard at the head of the table, holding court. Clara, glowing, seated next to Julian. Her mother, Eleanor, a woman who had mastered the art of willful blindness, offered him a weak, fluttering smile. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and unspoken contempt. "Now, so glad you could make it," Richard boomed, his bonhomie as fake as the Roman columns of his foyer. "We were just hearing about Julian's latest coup. Tell him, Julian. He used to be interested in business before he decided drawing pictures was a more viable career path." The table chuckled. Julian leaned back, a picture of relaxed confidence. "Just a little play in the commodities market. Richard. Nothing too exciting." He turned a smile on Leo. "Clara tells me you're an architect. Fascinating. Mostly residential, I assume." The question was coded, a subtle dismissal of his entire career. "I work on a variety of projects," Leo replied, his voice even. He took a sip of water, his movements deliberate. He would not let them rush him. He would not let them see him bleed. The dinner was a 2-hour ordeal of 1,000 tiny cuts. They spoke of their upcoming wedding in Lake Como, of a new jet Richard was purchasing, of Julian's plans to gut and remodel the house Leo had built. "It has good bones, I'll give you that," Julian conceded with a patronizing nod. "But the aesthetic is a little sterile. It needs warmth, personality." Clara, who had once wept with joy at the sight of the blueprints, nodded in enthusiastic agreement. "Julian has such a wonderful eye. We're going to open up the whole main floor. It will be much better for entertaining." Leo just listened. He ate his food, he answered their questions with polite, brief responses, and he watched. He watched the way Julian's hand rested a little too possessively on Clara's arm. He watched the way Richard preened under the younger man's flattery. He watched the way Clara's laughter never quite reached her eyes. He was cataloging every slight, every condescending remark, not for revenge, but for clarity. This was the list of grievances, not to be read aloud in anger, but to be understood as the foundation of his freedom. As the evening ended, Richard walked him to the door. He clapped a heavy hand on Leo's shoulder. "Listen, Leo, I know this was hard, but it's for the best. Clara's happy. She's with a man who can give her the life she deserves." He paused, looking Leo up and down. "No hard feelings, I hope. Business is business, after all." Leo met his gaze. "No hard feelings, Richard. You've all made your choices." He turned and walked away into the cool night air, the sound of their laughter echoing behind him. He didn't feel defeated. He felt light. The final tie had been cut. He got into his modest car and drove back to his small apartment, back to the world he was building in secret. On his drafting table, under the brilliant glow of his work lamp, lay the completed master plan for the Helios Tower, a skyscraper that would not just touch the sky, but redefine it. And at the bottom of the title block, in small, precise letters, were the words, "Leo Vance, lead architect." The project was funded by a silent, anonymous consortium from Asia, a consortium he had spent the last 6 months assembling himself. They weren't just his clients. They were his partners. The Davenports thought he was drawing pictures. He was building an empire. 2 years passed. To the Davenports, those years were a golden age. Richard's company, Davenport Properties, broke ground on its most ambitious project ever, a massive luxury residential and commercial tower in the heart of the city. It was the culmination of his life's work, a legacy-defining monument to his own success. The project was called the Apex, a name that dripped with his characteristic lack of subtlety. Clara and Julian's wedding was the social event of the year, a spectacle of excess that filled magazines for weeks. They were the city's new power couple, their lives a curated stream of galas, exotic vacations, and charitable endorsements. Leo Vance was a distant memory, a footnote in Clara's history, the drab, gray chapter before the story got good. They never spoke of him. They never had to. They had won. Leo spent those same 2 years in a state of intense, monastic focus. While the Davenports were celebrating, he was working. He had formed his own firm, Vance Architecture, operating out of sleek, minimalist office that was the polar opposite of his old shared studio. He hired a small, brilliant team, people who valued vision over profit, integrity over flash. They worked on the Helios Tower project in near-total secrecy. It was officially commissioned by a foreign investment group, Phoenix International, a name Leo had created to serve as a corporate shield. The project was so revolutionary in its design, a twisting, eco-conscious structure that generated more power than it consumed, that became the talk of the architectural world long before the public knew of it. But Leo's name was never attached. He remained in the shadows, the ghost architect behind a global sensation. He let the work speak for itself. He knew that when the time was right, it would shout. The time was approaching. Davenport's Apex Tower was nearing completion, and Richard was planning a massive black-tie gala to celebrate its launch. It was to be his coronation, the moment he officially ascended from a mere real estate mogul to a king of the city. Invitations were the most sought-after ticket in town. One found its way, as he knew it would, to Leo's office. It was addressed to the head of Vance Architecture. They did not know it was him. To them, he was just another industry professional they were legally obligated to invite. There was a small, handwritten note from Richard's assistant on the bottom. Mr. Davenport would be so pleased if you could attend. The irony was a fine, bitter wine. A week before the gala, Clara called him. It was the first time he had heard her voice in almost 2 years. It was strained, a brittle, cheerful sound that failed to mask an underlying tremor of anxiety. "Lau, it's me. Clara, I know," he said, his voice neutral. I know this is out of the blue, but Daddy's Apex launch is next week. It's a huge night for him. For us. I know we received your firm's RSVP, but I wanted to call and personally say, I hope you'll be there. Why? He asked. The question was simple, direct. She faltered. Well, it's a big night. And, well, it would be a gesture of goodwill. To show there are no hard feelings, the same phrase her father had used. It was their mantra, a way of absolving themselves of their own actions. There are no hard feelings, Clara, he said, and it was the truth. Hard feelings were an emotional burden. What he felt was not an emotion, but a state of being. It was the calm, patient certainty of a man who has built a structure designed to withstand any storm, who knows that the laws of physics and of justice are immutable. I'll be there. He hung up the phone and looked out his office window. His view was different now. From his vantage point, he could see the rising skeleton of the Helios Tower, already taller than the nearly completed apex. They were two giants vying for the same sky, but only one of them knew the truth of their foundations. Richard had built his tower on ego and debt. Leo had built his on integrity and vision. The night of the gala arrived. The city was electric with anticipation. Leo stood in his apartment, adjusting the cuffs of his tuxedo. He looked at his reflection in the window. The man looking back was not the same one who had walked out of that courtroom 2 years ago. The quiet acceptance had been replaced by a quiet confidence. The lightness of having nothing to lose had solidified into the gravity of having everything to fight for. He picked up a slim, silver business card holder from his table. It was the only accessory he carried. He walked out of his apartment and into the night, a quiet storm moving toward the eye of the hurricane. He was not going to the gala for a confrontation. He was going to a press conference, and he was the keynote speaker. The ballroom of the newly finished Apex Tower was a cathedral of arrogance. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. The air hummed with the sound of 1,000 conversations, all centered on one man, Richard Davenport. He stood on a raised dais, flanked by Clara and Julian, beaming like a Roman emperor. He was in his element, accepting congratulations, his voice booming across the room. Leo entered unnoticed, a single, dark figure moving through the glittering crowd. He took a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and found a quiet spot near the back, content to observe. He watched them for a long time. He saw Richard slap a city councilman on the back, saw Julian whisper something in Clara's ear that made her laugh, a brittle, practice laugh. He saw the intricate web of power and influence that Richard had woven around himself. It looked impressive, impenetrable. But Leo, the architect, saw its fatal design flaw. Its entire structure was supported by a single, central pillar, the success of this very building. About an hour into the event, Richard took to the stage, tapping a microphone to call for silence. The room quieted, 1,000 faces turning toward him, their expressions a mixture of admiration and envy. "Friends, colleagues, welcome," he began, his voice echoing through the grand hall. "Welcome to the future. Welcome to the apex." There was a roar of applause. Richard let it wash over him, his arms spread wide. "They said it couldn't be done. They said we were too ambitious. But look around you. We did it. This tower is a testament to vision, to strength, to the power of believing in yourself and never, ever letting anyone tell you what you can't do." Leo listened, a faint, ironic smile touching his lips. Richard's speech was a masterpiece of self-congratulation, a long list of his own supposed virtues. He thanked his team, his investors, his political allies. Finally, his eyes landed on his daughter. "And I want to thank my family, my beautiful daughter, Clara, and my brilliant son-in-law, Julian. They're my rock. They're the reason I do all this." Clara beamed, squeezing Julian's hand. From his vantage point, Leo saw Julian check his watch, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. The cracks in the facade were beginning to show. After the speech, as the orchestra began to play, Leo decided it was time. He started to move through the crowd, his path deliberate, a slow, inexorable trajectory toward the stage where the Davenports were holding court. People parted for him, a few giving him curious looks, unable to place the man with such quiet, commanding presence. Clara saw him first. Her smile froze on her face, a flicker of unease in her eyes. She leaned over and whispered to her father. Richard turned, and his jovial expression hardened as he saw Leo approaching. Julian's gaze followed, his face a mask of cool indifference. "Leo," Richard said, his voice a low growl as Leo reached the dais. "I see you made it. Enjoying the party? Come to see what a real success looks like." "It's an impressive building, Richard," Leo said, his voice calm, easily cutting through the noise. He looked from Richard to Clara, then to Julian. "I came to offer my congratulations. And a warning." Julian scoffed. "A warning? Don't be ridiculous. What could you possibly have to warn us about?" Leo's gaze settled on him. "I'd be careful with your commodities portfolio, Julian, especially your holdings in Pan-Asian steel. I hear the market is about to face a major correction." Julian's mask slipped. A flicker of genuine alarm crossed his face before he could hide it. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," Leo said softly. He then turned his attention back to Richard. "As for you, Richard, my warning is a bit more structural. I hope your engineers accounted for the revised wind shear coefficients for this district. The city updated them 6 months ago. It can cause unexpected harmonic resonance in a building of this height if not properly mitigated." Richard's face, already florid, began to turn a deeper shade of red. "What the hell are you talking about? My building is perfect. It was approved by the best engineers in the world." "Were they?" Leo asked, his voice still quiet, yet it seemed to command the space around them. The people nearby had fallen silent, sensing the shift in tone, the crackle of confrontation in the air. "Because the best engineer I know, Dr. Aristhorn, told me he refused to sign off on the final structural plans because your firm cut corners on the tensile steel specifications to save money." The color drained from Richard's face. Dr. Thorne was a legend, and his refusal would be a death sentence for the building's credibility. "That's a lie. You're a bitter, failed man trying to ruin my night." "Am I?" Leo asked. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the slim, silver business card holder. He didn't hand one to Richard. Instead, he simply held it in his palm. It was engraved with a simple, elegant logo, a stylized phoenix rising from flames, with the words Phoenix International underneath. Clara, who had been watching this exchange with growing horror, gasped. "Phoenix International. They're the ones building that other tower, the one that's going to be taller than ours." Her voice trailed off. Richard stared at the business card holder, then at Leo's face, a dawning, catastrophic realization beginning to form in his mind. What is this? What does that have to do with you? Leo's gaze was steady, his expression not triumphant, but somber, like a judge about to deliver a verdict. Phoenix International is my investment group, Richard. I'm the majority partner. He let that statement hang in the air for a moment, the silence around them spreading like a shockwave. Then he delivered the final devastating blow. And the Helios Tower, that's my project. I'm the lead architect. The world seemed to stop. For a moment, there was only the sound of the distant orchestra, playing a cheerful waltz that was now a grotesque soundtrack to the utter demolition of Richard Davenport's world. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. His face, which had cycled through red and white, now settled on a sickly gray. He looked like a man who had just watched his own legacy burn to the ground. Clara stared at Leo, her eyes wide with disbelief. The man she had dismissed, the man her father had crushed and cast aside, was the architect of the most talked-about building in the world, the secret power player who was outmaneuvering her father at every turn. It was impossible. It was unthinkable. But the look in Leo's eyes, the unshakable certainty, told her it was true. Julian was the first to react, his survival instincts kicking in. This is insane. You're lying. You're nobody. And nobody who knows that your entire fund is leveraged against the success of the Apex. Leo replied, his voice still low and even. A success that is now in question. And a nobody who knows that your family name is a fabrication and that your real name is Julian Krovic, and you have a warrant for securities fraud in 3 different countries. Julian froze, his face a canvas of pure terror. He looked from Leo to Clara, then to the crowd that was now openly staring, their phones discreetly pointed in their direction. The story was spreading through the room like wildfire. But that's not why I'm here, Leo continued, turning his full attention back to the shell-shocked Richard. I'm here because of this. He gestured to the opulent ballroom. You built this tower as a monument to your ego, Richard. You cut corners, you bullied regulators, you compromised on safety, all to get it done faster and cheaper. You put hundreds of lives at risk, both the workers who built it and the people who will live and work in it, all for your own glory. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. My project, the Helios Tower, was designed with a different principle. Not ego, but responsibility. Not profit, but purpose. It's not just a building. It's a statement about how we should build our future. Sustainable, safe, honest. Then he looked toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that lined the ballroom, which looked out over the glittering city. In fact, he said, checking his watch, the statement is about to be made public. As if on cue, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Everyone turned to look out the windows. Across the city, on the largest digital billboard in Times Square, an image had just appeared. It was a stunning, photorealistic rendering of the completed Helios Tower, its elegant, twisting form reaching for the stars. And beneath it, in massive letters, were the words, the Helios Tower. A new horizon. And below that, a face began to resolve onto the screen. It was a handsome, professional photograph of a man in his prime, his eyes filled with vision and quiet determination. It was the face of Leo Vance. The room was utterly silent. Richard Davenport stared at the billboard, his reflection a pale, ghostly image in the glass, superimposed over the face of the man who had just systematically dismantled his entire existence. He staggered back, clutching his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Clara let out a small, choked sob, her perfectly constructed world shattering into a million pieces. She looked at Julian, her fiancé, the brilliant man of her dreams, and saw only a cheap con artist, his face pale with sweat as he began to back away, melting into the panicked crowd. Leo watched them, not with satisfaction, but with a profound and heavy sadness. This was not a victory lap. It was a reckoning. The truth, like a well-designed structure, had its own weight, its own integrity. And tonight, it had finally been brought to bear. He had not sought revenge. He had simply continued to build, and the foundation of their world, built on lies and arrogance, had crumbled under the weight of what he had created. The quiet bomb had detonated, and the silence it left behind was more devastating than any explosion. The immediate aftermath was chaos, but a strangely muted kind. The scene at the gala did not erupt into shouting. It imploded. Richard Davenport, clutching his chest, was quietly escorted out by paramedics, his face a mask of gray disbelief. He wasn't having a heart attack, the doctors would later say, but a panic attack so severe it mimicked one, a sudden, violent confrontation with his own irrelevance. Julian Croft, or Krovic, vanished. He didn't run. He simply evaporated into the throng of horrified guests, slipping out a side door and into the night, leaving a trail of financial ruin and a diamond ring on a table. Clara was left alone on the dais, a queen on a sinking island. The whispers around her grew into a low, buzzing hum. The guests, who moments before had been toasting her family's success, now looked at her with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She was no longer the belle of the ball. She was the centerpiece of a catastrophe. Her eyes frantically searched the crowd, looking for an ally, a friendly face, but found only the cold, assessing stares of a world that had already written her off. Her gaze finally fell on Leo, who was standing quietly by the window, watching the city lights, his face on the Times Square billboard still glowing in the distance. She stumbled toward him, her movements clumsy in her couture gown. "Leo," she whispered, her voice raw. How could you do this to us?" "To me?" Leo turned to face her. His expression was not angry, not triumphant, but weary. "I didn't do this to you, Clara. You did this. You and your father. You made your choices, and these are the consequences." "Choices," she cried, her voice rising. "I chose a better life, a life you couldn't give me. He was successful. He was a fraud," Leo said simply. "And your father is a reckless man who values his reputation more than people's safety. You didn't choose a better life. You chose a shinier one. You traded substance for an illusion." He looked at her, his eyes holding a deep, ancient sadness. "I showed you the blueprints for our house, and you love them. But you never bothered to learn the difference between a pretty picture and a solid foundation. You're still that person, Clara. You're living in a beautiful rendering, and you're terrified that it isn't real." Tears streamed down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "What am I supposed to do now?" It was the question of a child, lost and afraid. "You learn to build something for yourself," he said, his voice softening slightly. "Something real. Something that's yours, not your father's, not your husband's. You have to draw your own plans. Clara." He reached into his pocket and placed something in her hand. It was a simple, elegant fountain pen. Every architect starts with a single line. He then turned and walked away, leaving her clutching the pen as if it were a lifeline, the crowd parting for him as he left the ruins of their party behind. The days and weeks that followed were a cascade of consequences. The news of Leo's revelation and Julian's fraudulence exploded across the financial and society pages. The story was too perfect. The scorned husband, the secret genius, the arrogant tycoon, the beautiful but foolish heiress. It was a modern-day fable, and the Davenports were cast as the villains. The professional fallout for Richard was swift and brutal. The city launched a full-scale investigation into the Apex Tower's construction. Dr. Aristhorne, a man of unimpeachable integrity, confirmed Leo's story. He had refused to sign off on the plans, citing numerous safety concerns that Richard had ignored. Stop work orders were issued. The building, once a symbol of Richard's triumph, became a monument to his disgrace, a half-finished steel skeleton haunting the skyline. His investors, spooked by the scandal and the potential for endless lawsuits, pulled their funding. Davenport Properties, leveraged to the hilt to finance the project, began to collapse. Banks called in their loans. The empire Richard had spent a lifetime building was dissolving like sand through his fingers. For Clara, the consequences were more personal and perhaps more profound. Her social world vanished overnight. The friends who had flocked to her parties now crossed the street to avoid her. Her name became synonymous with scandal and poor judgment. Stripped of her father's wealth and her fiancé's status, she was forced to see herself for the first time not as a Davenport, but as Clara, and she found there was very little there. The house Leo had built, her gilded cage, was seized by the bank as part of her father's bankruptcy proceedings. She was forced to move into a small apartment, a life she had always viewed with disdain, now her reality. Eleanor, her mother, the silent enabler, was lost. Her entire identity had been tied to being Mrs. Richard Davenport, a grande dame of society. With her husband's reputation in tatters and their wealth gone, she retreated into a world of recriminations and Xanax, blaming everyone but the man whose every sin she had quietly sanctioned with her silence. The family unit, which had presented such a formidable, united front against Leo, fractured under the pressure of their own failure. Their arrogance had been a bond. Their humiliation was a solvent. Through it all, Leo remained focused on his work. He took no public pleasure in their downfall. When reporters called him for a comment, he issued a simple statement through his firm. Vance Architecture is focused on the successful and timely completion of the Helios Tower. We believe it will be a landmark of which the entire city can be proud. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. The tower, rising higher each day, was his response. It was a physical manifestation of his vindication, a silent, elegant rebuttal to every insult they had ever hurled at him. He found an unexpected ally in Dr. Aristhorne, the brilliant old engineer who requested a meeting with Leo. The old man, with eyes that had seen 1,000 buildings rise and fall, shook Leo's hand. "Your design for the Helios," he said, his voice raspy with age. "It's not just brilliant, Mr. Vance. It's honest. It's been a long time since I've seen a building with a soul." He offered to consult on the project for free. It was the highest compliment Leo could have received. He was no longer the outcast. He had been welcomed into the very heart of the world that had once shunned him, not because of wealth or power, but because of the quality of his work and the integrity of his character. 9 months later, the city had settled into a new reality. The skeleton of the Apex Tower stood as a rusted warning, a gravestone for a dead dream, tangled in lawsuits that would likely outlive Richard Davenport himself. He was a broken man, rarely seen in public, his legendary arrogance replaced by a shuffling, haunted gait. In contrast, the Helios Tower was a beacon of progress. Its crystalline facade was nearly complete, its twisting form a marvel of engineering and aesthetics that had already won a dozen international design awards. It was more than a building. It was a landmark, a symbol of a new way of thinking. Leo stood on the observation deck of the 90th floor, the wind whipping at his coat, the entire city sprawling beneath him. He was not a king surveying his kingdom. He was an architect admiring his creation, feeling a deep, quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge. His assistant informed him he had a visitor. He had agreed to the meeting, though he wasn't sure why. A sense of closure, perhaps. He rode the construction elevator down to his on-site office, a glass box overlooking the organized chaos of the main plaza. Clara was waiting for him. She looked different. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple dress. Her hair was pulled back, and she wore little makeup. The changes were more than cosmetic. The brittle, defensive hardness in her eyes had been replaced by a weary fragility. She looked, for the first time in years, like herself. "Leo," she said, her voice quiet. "Thank you for seeing me." "Clara," he nodded, gesturing to a chair. "What can I do for you?" She didn't sit. She walked to the window, looking up at the impossible height of the tower. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's everything you ever talked about. Everything I didn't understand." She turned back to him, her eyes filled with a sorrow so profound it seemed to have aged her. "I'm not here to ask for anything. Not for money, not for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that. I'm here to apologize." She took a breath, the words coming with difficulty. "I was a coward. I was weak. I let my father and my fear of not having enough, of not being enough, turn me into a terrible person. I belittled your dreams because I was too small to see them. I threw away the most valuable thing I ever had because I didn't know how to recognize its worth." She looked down at her hands. "I'm working now. A junior assistant at a small art gallery. It's not much, but it's mine. I'm drawing my own plans, like you said. Leo listened, his expression unchanged. He felt a stir of the old affection, not for the woman she had been, but for the woman she was struggling to become. It was a painful, difficult transformation, and he respected the effort. I'm glad to hear that, Clara, he said, and he meant it. Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. I know it's too late for us. I destroyed that, but I just needed you to know that I see it now. I see you. I see what I lost. She reached in her purse and pulled out a small, worn object. It was the leather-bound journal he had tried to give her in the lawyer's office, the one her father had tossed back at him. Your things went into storage when the house was sold. I found this. I think you should have it. He took the journal. Their fingers brushed, a spark of a life that might have been. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not an antagonist, but a human being who had made terrible mistakes and was now living with them. Thank you, he said. I wish you well, Clara. I hope you build something beautiful. It was a dismissal, gentle but final. She understood. She gave him a small, sad smile, a ghost of the one he had once loved, and walked away. He watched her go, a figure crossing the vast, unfinished plaza of his greatest triumph, a solitary person starting the long, hard work of building a life from the ground up. He felt a sense of peace. The story was over. The final line had been drawn. 1 year later, the Helios Tower officially opened. It was a global event. The tower was hailed as a masterpiece, a triumph of sustainable design and human ingenuity. Leo Vance was no longer a secret. His face was on the cover of Time magazine. Hailed as the architect of the future, he had wealth, fame, and the respect of the entire world. But as he stood at the opening ceremony, he felt that his true success was not the tower itself, but the journey he had taken to build it. He had faced humiliation and loss, and he had refused to let it make him bitter. He had been given every reason to become a vengeful man, but he had chosen to be a creator instead. His victory was not in the Davenport's fall, but in his own rise. He had proven that true worth isn't measured by status or wealth, but by the integrity of one's work and the strength of one's character. Hidden strength, he had learned, is the most powerful kind because it builds foundations that no amount of arrogance or contempt can ever shake. He had lost a wife and a house, but he had gained himself. And in doing so, he had reshaped the skyline, both of the city and of his own life. The world is full of people who will try to tell you your worth. They'll measure you by your bank account, your job title, or the company you keep. But the truth is, you're the only one who could define your own value. Like Leo, you are the architect of your own life. Sometimes, losing everything is the only way to clear the ground to build something truly magnificent. The most beautiful structures are often built from the ruins of what came before. What did you think of Leo's journey? Did Clara and her father get what they deserved? Or is there room for redemption even after such profound mistakes? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective is what makes this community so special. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories of integrity, resilience, and ultimate vindication. Thank you for watching, and remember, never let anyone else hold the blueprint to your life.